I'm Jeff Helfrich, State Representative for House District 52. Life's messy, government's messier. When I was on the street, I got to see what worked and what didn't work. And in Salem, I see a lot of things that aren't working. I want to cut through that red tape, get to simpler government, and get to stuff that works for you. Here's our next episode. That's perfect, right? This episode is about law enforcement and keeping politics out of it. Today, I've got Matt. Matt, thanks for coming to be on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
What was your drive like? We were talking about that before we kind of started, and the Hood River's a little bit 2 hour, easy 2 hour drive, if not more. But what was it like in the gorge?
Oh, yeah, it was a nice day, a little bit windy, but it's always, the drive is always based on what Portland's traffic's going to do. So it's a little slow down today, but not bad.
Yeah, the bottleneck from 205, I don't know, all the way to I-5.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
I'm on transportation. I'm trying to fix that issue. So on my podcast, I will take your bio and I'll read it to make sure I get it right, and we'll kind of kick off the show from there, okay?
Sounds good.
All right. So I am joined today with Sheriff Matt English. He's been with the Hood River County Sheriff's Office. He's been the sheriff since 2013. He was reelected to his fourth term in 2024. He was raised in Sherman County and graduated from Sherman Union High School. Matt went on to attend Southern Oregon University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in social science. In 1998, he began his career in public safety as a parole and probation officer. Man, that's a tongue twister. Parole and probation officer with Hood River County. In 2000, he transferred to the sheriff's office, where he worked as a patrol deputy, a detective investigating major crimes. Matt currently chairs the Oregon Board on Public Safety and is the co-chair of the Western States Sheriff's Association Government Affairs and Public Lands Committee, and is a member of the National Sheriff's Association Government Affairs Committee. He was the 2020 Oregon Sheriff of the Year and recently recognized as the 24-25 Sheriff of the Year for the Western States Sheriff Association for continuing advocacy surrounding public lands use and public safety in Western U.S. With that, Matt, I remember, I think the first time you and I intersected was a crime spree that somebody did when they were a reserve firefighter or volunteer firefighter, and they stole a bunch of stuff out of the fire station, and then we used the Northwest Rapid to kind of find where the stuff got pawned to, and was trying to get a lot of that stuff back. And that was kind of, I remember, the first real interaction we had together when I was a sergeant and you were a patrol deputy. Actually, I think you were a sergeant or a detective. Yeah, detective at that time.
Yeah, that was probably about 2009 or so.
Yeah. So from my time in politics, Matt, I have seen, especially working in Portland, my time in law enforcement and in politics, where politics has kind of infected law enforcement a little bit. And I talked with this, I think it's just a great subject because people don't realize it, is that as law enforcement officers, we have some of the most tremendous responsibility and authority. We can take somebody in custody, seize them, seize their property, seize their cash, seize their car, place handcuffs on them, take them to jail, never read them the Miranda rights. They may never know what's going on until up to 72 hours after the arrest, until they see the judge, and they won't know what's going on. And my fear was always social engineering by elected politicians, i.e. in Portland, and where they could use the armed branch of the government to take people's civil liberties away and impose a will on somebody. And people looked at me funny when I said that, and this was in the late 2000s. I just was kind of watching how things were going. It was just a fear. And you as an elected sheriff have a different role because you're elected by the people, for the people, but yet you're still controlled by the county government a little bit with budgets. You have to advocate for your budget. But with that, we saw in Portland after the riots or during the riots and stuff where police just couldn't go do their jobs. There was a defund-the-police movement and all that. And we saw when there was selective enforcement or lack of enforcement, how a city burned. It was horrible. So in your role as sheriff, how do you see politics affecting law enforcement today, since we've moved past that? And I think my colleagues across the aisle want to forget what happened during the 2020 time, during not just COVID, but also those riots were going on. And then especially, the pressure to use your authority for social agendas. How do you stop that? And where do you see that going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are great questions. I think the bottom line is with the politics piece, you're never going to get away from it, but it's how you navigate it. And I'll say, I feel really fortunate to be an Oregon sheriff because we are a nonpartisan position.
Right.
And I think that it needs to stay that way. I look at some of my counterparts around the U.S. where they're in partisan positions, and I think it makes this job a little more difficult. And this isn't at all to take anything away from party politics, but I think for a sheriff, for the role that we have in public safety, it helps us navigate that a little bit. I think, we've started to come back to center now, politically for public safety. If you look at Oregon, I think the last two sessions, from my perspective, have been a lot better.
It's because I was there advocating.
Well, I mean, it
helps, yeah.
honestly, there's, the Oregon sheriffs have a saying, and it's relationships are primary,
right.
Everything else is secondary. And we really subscribe to that. And so I think where we kind of got off track was there was a lot of emotion around the country in 2020, 2021. And that emotion of things happening in other states leaked into Oregon, and then, right away it's like all law enforcement this, all, and right. So we've got to make this knee-jerk change. And that's where we saw what was really difficult is where you see special interest groups that really have an agenda. And that agenda, like we saw, was either defund the police or take some of the authority away and things like that. But I think there was so much emotion around these issues that seeing the bigger picture was difficult. And today we've had to back off of some of those things. They've had to reverse some of those things because they just don't work. So I think to navigate that today, it's just continuing those relationships. We've seen in Oregon where, right now one party has a majority in our legislature. But years ago, it was the other party that had that, and the same issues come up if you don't have the drive to collaborate, if you don't have that that need to sit down and negotiate. And I'm thankful right now we do. I mean, we have advocates on both sides of the aisle, and that's what we need, and that needs to continue, and that's where we're successful because. Public safety shouldn't be partisan.
It should be political. It
right.
really shouldn't.
And it's so everybody's going to have different ideas, and that's fantastic. And that's where we can come up with compromise. That's where we can come up with something that's workable for everybody. And maybe neither side is happy, but that's probably where you have a good solution.
I think you're right. That's when, if not everybody's happy, that's pretty good. You got a pretty good solution going on.
Yeah.
So when you saw the police not being able to do their jobs, politicians came in, you had Mayor Ted Wheeler basically stand down the Portland Police Bureau, and it was heartbreaking to watch that. It really was. For you as a sheriff, how did that affect rural sheriffs in the rural part of the state where all eyes are on Portland? It's so Portland-centric. If Portland goes down, the rest of the state goes down. You kind of saw that filter out a little bit. What was your experience with the whole defund and all that affecting your county, and then even over a couple more counties too?
Yeah, there were some impacts. I will say that, fortunately, we continued to have a really good relationship with our community. Hood River County is also become a very liberal county, and so there were plenty of protests. But as far as like pressure on my office, there wasn't much, honestly, because we maintained that good relationship. And it was, I don't know, it kind of warmed your heart sometimes because we had people coming up to us and they would start crying. I'm so sorry about what's happening. I'm so sorry what's happening to your profession. And I'm, just know we support you. And so, that was just kind of reaffirming for us, but it was tough because we border Multnomah County. I had deputies that I sent into Multnomah County to assist them, because they, as big as Multnomah County is, what was happening there, strained and depleted their resources. So everybody was sending in people, and especially that first weekend when the riots kicked off, I had people downtown helping the sheriff's office protect the jail,
the Justice Center.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it impacted everybody. And that stuff would bleed out into, the surrounding counties. And I think as you went out further into Oregon, there was certainly, some of the sheriffs felt different impacts than others, but everybody had some impact from it. And again, I think it was that let's paint everything with this broad brush that, everything's the same, but we know our communities in Oregon are vastly different. And I think, that kind of circles back to the politics and public safety. And, really all politics are local
Right.
At the end of the day, because all of our counties are so unique, all of our cities are so unique. And I think we tend to forget that sometimes when we try to do these broad changes, that it just doesn't work in lots of parts of the state.
Right. So you mentioned something that really kind of caught my attention, and you talked about the uniqueness of different parts of the state. And for my house, District 52, it borders Metro, but it goes to rural Oregon. And one of the things for me was unique when I left the Bureau in 2017 and then went to the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office for a few months and then became the state representative. During that time frame, we had the Eagle Creek fire, and you had to send resources. You were the instant commander. You did all these things because of that, how that affected Hood River. Let's talk about your interagency working with Multnomah County and other things, but you did a tremendous job on structuring evacuations and all those things that people don't really know unless you're there, you're in law enforcement. They just, oh, the sheriff did this and the sheriff did that. But just kind of walk through that a little bit, because that, to me, that was a tremendous thing, what you did and how you kind of just kept managing that, because it's a fire. It has its own characteristics. You know what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, number one, I will tell you, I hope I never have to experience that again.
That was a deal. That's what we call a deal.
Yeah, it was. It was, what it came down to for me was, we had a community that was really scared. It was a rapidly evolving situation. It was changing daily. That fire changed directions multiple times. On that first day, we saw that wind just push it from Hood River County into Multnomah County. And I mean, it was going a mile an hour. And that is a tremendous speed. It jumped the river that night. Mm-hmm. It started to affect Washington. I was down right there at the fire, and it was a storm. It was like a firestorm. It was incredible. And horrific. And, but really what it came down to is, that's where you've got to step up and be a leader. Right. And we have a community that was scared. We had Cascade Locks, a community of about 1,500, that the better part of that city was evacuated for a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Yeah, they went over to Stevenson, right?
They were, and again, because of our partnerships, in the region, Skamania County was fantastic, and we were able to take those folks at the fairgrounds. But, one of the things that I did was I said, it's important that people hear what's going on directly and not get these rumors or hear it second or third hand. So I made an effort to get over there face to face and answer questions and tell them and give them updates, because they were displaced from their homes. Right. And, it was getting out there, making sure that we had good communication, that we were working with all of our agencies. We had a tremendous amount of help from around the state come in, and I'm, we'll be forever grateful for that. But it's one of those things where you've got to have a team, and it's got to be a team effort. And that's something that we're adept at in a small resource poor county. And so partnerships are second nature for us, but that really was a glaring example of how effective you can be with those partnerships. Yeah.
So follow-up partnerships. Explain so people can understand. I mean, we live in the national scenic area, so we have different rules we have to abide by when it comes to building codes and just what you can actually do in the gorge. And to get assistance from Multnomah County, it's a long drive for them to come out of Troutdale. But talk about the counties that are there, and how you guys have created the multi-agency disciplinary teams and those mutual aid agreements, and how you have 3 bridges. You got the Bridge of the Gods, the Hood River Bridge, and you got the Dalles Bridge for that stretch of river, and that's it. Talk about kind of how mentioned relationships, not just on the Oregon side, but the Washington side too, because I see that as a big plus.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, we just met last week for the first time in a while, just to kind of go over things again. But it's a partnership on both sides, as you mentioned, and all the agencies in not only Hood River, Wasco, Sherman County, but also Skamania and Klickitat, and that includes our state partners. And we actually have a formal agreement because there's so much crossover, and because all of the counties are similar with, they're very small. So we're, probably on both sides of the river, we're talking about 80,000, 90,000 people maybe total in that 5-county area. And so, again, it's critical that we all work together, and it's sharing resources. We're going to update our resource list so that if, somebody in one of the counties needs something, they can just make a call. But we've seen this time and time again. Before the Eagle Creek fire, we saw the Moser train derailment.
Right.
And same deal. We had a community evacuated. This time it happened to be in Wasco County, but everybody sent resources, and from both sides of the river. And so, it's at the end of the day, everybody has the same goal. It's keep the public safe, and we wanted to keep property safe. And so we were running patrols in the city of Moser for that event. Multiple counties, you'd see different stars on the side of cars, but everybody was pitching in, doing the same job. And so that's really what it's all about.
Yeah. So what some people don't realize, because I think Clackamas County gets a lot of the attention when it comes to people lost on Mount Hood when they go up hiking up out of Timberline, is just there's only less than a mile or whatever. I can't remember where the line is actually at on Mount Hood, but you are a neighboring agency. Talk about search and rescue, and then I want to talk about budget deficits and budget problems, and how all that kind of hurts the small rural communities and the smaller counties, because we don't have timber tax anymore. We don't have sales tax, and you've got all the Hood River is so driven by the tourism industry, windsurfers, kite surfers, people hiking all the time, and I'm just going to go for a day hike. You can't get straight out of Mount Hood. So talk about your search and rescue. What you got an airplane. You got the former sheriff still flies, I think, for you every once in a while. Puts around in that little yellow airplane. Is it yellow or is it white?
Yellow. Right. White and yellow.
Yeah, white and yellow. That's right. It's been a while since I've seen it.
Yep.
Talk about that, and then we'll kind of talk about how the funding issues and where you see some help is at.
Yeah, so on Mount Hood, I mean, we actually share Mount Hood. It's 50% right down the middle. So the line basically goes right through the summit. And when you're actually at Timberline, if you look off to the right side of the mountain in that White River
Basin
canyon,
area.
that's the Hood River County line.
Okay.
And so
good to know when you're hunting, so you know what right county you're in.
Yeah. And what happens oftentimes is, people will climb the south side because that's the most climbed route. I won't say it's easy, but it's the easier to climb. Right. The north side, our side's more technical. However, what happens a lot of times is people will go up there and they'll fall into our county. But again, partnerships. So we work really closely with Clackamas and communicate well, share resources. We fly for them often because, as you mentioned, we do have an airplane. It's really a necessity. It's been a godsend to make sure that we continue to have that resource. Because that really just keeps people safe. We can really find people a lot quicker than putting a bunch of people on the ground, and keep them out of harm's way and send them to the subject when we find them from the air. But yeah, it's a challenge. So Hood River County is only about 25,000 people, but you talk about all the recreation and tourism. So the U.S. Forest Service every so many years does what's called this National Visitation Usage Model. It's called the INVUM. And in the Columbia River Gorge, their last count was about 2.4 million visitors a year, and then Mount Hood National Forest is about 4.9 million visitors a year. And so, obviously we have parts of both of those forests in our county, and so we see a tremendous amount of visitors. I mean, Mount Hood Meadows, which is in our county, is 500,000 skiers a year. And so we're talking, a sheriff's office that myself included on the enforcement side is 21 people. And so when you rank in the top 5th in the state in search and rescue every year and have that amount of visitation, it really puts a strain on resources. And we get squawking from our community, rightfully so, because of all the time, money, and effort that goes into providing resources to tourists and rescues to tourists. And so that has been one of my top priorities as sheriff. And it's hard to make inroads there because we're talking about most of that's federal ground. Our only search and rescue funding comes through the Secure Rural Schools Act, which is federal. Right now, it hasn't been authorized. It's the second time since I've been sheriff that it hasn't been reauthorized, which we're worried about because our funding comes through the Title III of that act. But it's we had some legislative action a few years ago, and we were able to get a SAR card started through a search and rescue card started through the Oregon legislature. That's basically voluntary. It's been really difficult to get off the ground because there wasn't any money with that. Right. And so that's something that we've continuously worked on. It just hasn't come to fruition yet. But, we know as time goes on, the numbers continue to tick up, and our resources aren't getting any more vast. And so it's going to be a continuous challenge. You see things like the federally funded bike path in the gorge now. So that bike path, just kind of dirty math, adding up all of the different projects they're about $100 million into that. And $100 million of taxpayer money, and they're going to pitch it as a national biking trail, but there is $0.00 from the federal government that came to support the critical infrastructure, the critical services that it's going to impact. And so I'm really worried about those things. The next project to tie it into Hood River, the price tag on that is just astronomical. And those are the things that make me grind my teeth or stay up at night and lose sleep because it seems like there's fail to recognize the impact on communities. I am all about tourism. I'm all about supporting our economy, but you've got to have the services that are going to support those tourists.
Right. The other thing I don't think people realize is the Pacific Crest Trail. This goes into Hood River County. Mm-hmm. And somebody gets injured or hurt there, you got to go figure out where they're at and go rescue them. And that costs money, resources, time. And a lot of your search and rescue people are volunteers, but they got to take time away from their job. They're risking their livelihoods, their bodily injury and stuff, and all those things. And so I think people realize that impact. So I want to switch gears just for a second. Let's talk about. I remember, and it was kind of a sad story, but across the river, there's a company called In Situ that does these drones, and they bring in a lot of different countries in and have their people train on them. If I remember the story right, there was a guy from Poland's Special Forces that decided, hey, I'm going to go climb Mount Hood today. Why don't you walk through what that was and how tragic that ended up being? And unfortunately, go ahead and tell a story about how, the wife had to be flown to see actually his final resting place.
Yeah, and that, I think that's a case that really, it's not the first time that has happened, and it's not the last. This one was interesting because it involved a foreign government, a military person. It was tragic at the end of the day, but essentially, In Situ would bring foreign militaries over to train them on their product. And so this gentleman left and was going to climb Mount Hood. I think he was experienced in some aspects, but just not with, what our mountains are like. European mountains are granite. We're basalt, and they're crumbly, and there's a lot to it. And so he just left late in the day. later than you should if you're going to summit. He tried to summit, got up, I think over 10,000 feet, and was in a collier that basically collects rock, essentially, that falls down off of the summit. And he took about 1,000-foot, 1,200-foot fall and was, unfortunately killed. And so because of the location, we were able to see where he was, but it was too treacherous to get in there. We couldn't get aircraft in there. We couldn't get people in there. We tried for about 3 years, I think, to do a recovery. I think that happened in 2013. But, his comrades from Poland, they actually flew a special forces team out to Hood River. We worked directly with them. They specialize in search and rescue as well. We worked really well with them and really wanted to recover their teammate for him. It just wasn't. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. But that was an interesting one because the Polish government was involved. I was actually in the Polish consulate in D.C. To meet with them and kind of go over options and things like that. And so. We finally made an attempt. We were able to get the Polish government rented a helicopter. We rented a specialized piece of equipment from Denali National Park, or we took it on loan. And we had an operation set up and we're going to, essentially what it did was a big grapple off the helicopter. But it snowed that night, the night before we were supposed to go up there, and that was it. And then after that, his remains weren't visible anymore. So, it was really unfortunate. Family came out eventually, and they did a service for him, and his military unit and the Polish government were really grateful and thankful. It was just it was sad that we couldn't bring total closure to the family, but. Again, I think that really is. I think that really kind of paints a picture of things that happen on a fairly regular basis. I mean, there was another incident, I think the year after that, where a priest from New Jersey had summited on the Clackamas side, looked over the Hood River side, and fell through a cornice and fell about 1,000 feet and passed away. And and those are national news events, and we've had many up there. We've had many. So
I highlight those because I don't think people realize what sheriffs in rural part of Oregon actually face, what they actually do. And Clackamas gets a lot of the news media because it is Clackamas, one of the larger counties and larger population base. They'll go up and have a rescue. Their team up there rescues people, and you saw a Black Hawk helicopter crash, quite a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's you're taking your life in your own hands in that. One of the things I push for being on the Public Safety Ways and Means Subcommittee is, how do we combine assets and resources? Can you co-locate, say OSP, a new building with a new DOT building or a Oregon Department of Transportation building, something like that. So you can just have one set of infrastructure and stuff like that. And I know I've talked about it with you on and off, and Sheriff Reese really, when he was just a deputy sheriff with Multnomah County, he pushed for like a metro like they do in King County. Do you see Hood River and other counties kind of combining under an umbrella of the sheriff's office, and then instead of multiplying, having dual law enforcements in the city and the county is a viable option for saving resources, or is it net wash?
I think we've seen that happen quite a bit, just kind of naturally across the state, and we've seen it with bigger jurisdictions quite a bit as well. We've seen it in Deschutes County, Clackamas County, Washington County, and even Multnomah County taking over some of these smaller cities and going with contracts. We looked at it really hard actually in 2012, and that was the first decision that I had to make as sheriff. Whether we wanted to go that route. And I think at the end of the day, it pencils out better for cities and not necessarily for counties. There are some contracts, like we have a contract with the city of Cascade Locks, which I really appreciate. And I think, for them to try to start a police department, we're talking $155,000 contract a year versus, probably $1 million to run a police department. And so, it really pencils out for cities. I think it makes a lot of sense in some areas. In Hood River, I think the city of Hood River is growing enough. There is enough differences that I don't see it as a viable option right now.
Yeah.
There's just so much difference. It's not. I don't think that there's a lot of overlapping resources necessarily, because the city has their own set of problems, their own focus, and they do a good job
Right.
with that. And then we're most of our enforcement's outside of the city limits of Hood River, and Hood River is a little bit unique because the majority of the population is actually outside of the city of Hood River,
Right.
and that's shifting a bit, particularly over the last 10 years or so, but it still is the case. Whereas you look at to the east of us in Wasco County, the majority of the population resides in the city of the Dalles. So it's a little bit different. It's a little unique. And so we actually police more people with the sheriff's office than the city police. But the city police, their impacts, because that's the hub of the county. I mean, they did a study years ago where their average daily population is probably around 25,000 people there. And so they have their own set of issues and things like that. And, I think right now it makes sense for them for us to continue as we are.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about search and rescue on the mountain, but we have this thing called the Columbia River. You have a Marine Patrol. Last year, a very tragic accident happened where a boat capsized and people weren't wearing life jackets. Kind of talk about that and what that looks like, because we are the windsurfing capital of the world, and people get injured out there. They get on their paddleboard and end up, I don't know, catching the wind too much and end up upriver or downriver where they shouldn't be, and they not wearing their safety gear or whatever's going on. They end up, you diving, finding dead bodies, rescuing people that hopefully will be alive. There's a variety of things. Why don't you talk about that a little bit and how that impacts the budget? And I want to kind of get maybe an answer to maybe helping out with some of this stuff.
Yeah, that's another great one, and that's a piece of search and rescue, but we do have a full-time Marine deputy. That position's funded by the Oregon State Marine Board. The Marine Board, as isn't general funded, but it's a challenge.
Right.
It's a challenge to continue to get funding, particularly this time of year through about the end of September. It's really difficult with one person. What people don't realize, you're driving along on I-84 or Highway 14, you look over at the river and it maybe looks a little windy, you see some whitecaps out there. You get out there in a boat, it is not uncommon to not be able to see the shore. It is
big swells. It's like being in the ocean.
Yeah, and a little different too because it's wind-driven swells, and so they're a little closer together, and you've got to have your wits about you, because if you get that boat turned sideways, you're going to capsize. And so, it's definitely takes a skill set. It's about, supporting the recreation and the economy in our county. But we're seeing, like this year, for the first time since about 2015, the Marine Board funding is not covering our one FTE. There's not even enough to do that. And so we're coming up with a shortfall. We're trying to figure out how we're going to navigate that with the budget, because like in Hood River County, we had to pass a public safety levy because we're one of the lowest tax rates in the state. Right. And as costs go up, the revenues coming into the counties aren't increasing, and I would imagine the Marine Board is probably facing the same issue. But now we've got this funding gap, and it's not a nicety, it's an expectation, and it's a necessity for us to have Marine Patrol. And you talked about, it's not just the recreation, there's a lot of events. We've seen one of the top 5 paddleboard events in the world hosted there. Kiteboarding for Cancer, I think, is the largest amateur windsurfing event in North America. And
Cascade Locks, they get the Razor class sailing, the World
absolutely,
Championships, National Championships.
Yep. Yeah. It is a destination for sure. And so we've got to have those resources. And we're the only sheriff's office in that 5-county region that I talked about that has a full-time Marine deputy. And we're the only ones that keep a boat in the water all the time.
Even intertribe is the tribal police. They have a boat, but they don't keep it in the water.
Yeah, they have multiple boats. They're great partners. They respond with us a lot, but again, it's not their primary mission because they're doing treaty fishing enforcement, and they have a huge area to cover as well.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, they're all the way up into Umatilla County and on both sides of McNary Dam. Yep, both sides of the river. So, but they're great partnerships, and again, that's where our partnerships are critical because we partner with the Washington agencies in Wasco County, and everybody has boats, but just not necessarily drivers.
Staffing,
Yeah.
So you mentioned, I know your one Sergeant Joel.
Mm-hmm.
He and I think it was Sheriff Wampler at the time. It might have been you, but when I started doing the kind of Faces of Meth for the kids in the high school, that interacted well. But I remember we were having lunch and there was a call that somebody needed to cover, and I was just riding with Joel when we were at lunch and went up there, and out in the middle of nowhere, it's like you had a city officer, you had Joel and myself from Portland. None of us, I wasn't on the same radio frequency, so I kind of say close to Joel, just looking for an armed suspect that was wanted that ran from the police, and it's like, you guys are out there. I mean, it's just one or two bodies, and coming from Portland where I could get on the radio and summon, 20, 30 officers within, 10 minutes, could empty the city out and get to a location. And your officers are professional. They're well-trained. They got their heads about them. And they're it's their relationships with the communities where they can kind of de-escalate, not have to go to that force option. They will if they have to, but they don't have to all the time. I think it's just a testament to you and what your leadership is. The Colorado does it. I've talked about it a couple of times, but when you buy a hunting or fishing license, you can get an extra charge, like $20. I think it's $20 now, but that goes into this search and rescue fund. And if you have a valid fishing license or hunting license and you have that additional pay for that then helps them offset those costs. Do you see that as an option for some of the search and rescue now? Because dollars are getting scarce, and I see it as multiple, right? So you have people coming from out of state that will be buying hunting or fishing licenses. They get that added insurance in there. So then that helps generate more revenue for Fish and Wildlife, but then those extra dollars go into a separate fund where you can draw those out to help offset costs. Do you see that as an option?
Yeah, we looked really hard at that. There was definitely some folks that wanted to look hard at that when we were doing the search and rescue card. I think we were working on that about 2017, 2018, probably.
2018 is when I was there, yeah.
Yeah. And, I think, well, Jeff, it got political. So,
yes, it did. It got real political.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've got to do, the bottom line is we have to do something. We have to do something as we see visitation continue to rise in Oregon. You can look at the Department of Emergency Management at their stats. Statewide, 98% of search and rescues statewide are done for out-of-county residents. You talk about the Eagle Creek fire. We talked about that earlier. That was probably the largest search and rescue as far as number of people in Oregon's history. And if there was another one, I'm not aware of it because we rescued 173 people off of the trail that day. But what was interesting was when we were gathering information from them the next day, again, a partnership with the school district, they brought buses in. We had to hike them miles and miles out the south side because we had two converging fires, cut them off, lots of people that were up there for the day, but we had people from all over the world. And it's just incredible to see how much visitation there is. Lots of Europeans, lots of people from the Eastern U.S.
Right.
And so the point is that this is going to continue. We're seeing this continue. What we saw after COVID or even during COVID was a lot of this activity was getting pushed further east to even more rural communities. And so these sheriff's
Social
offices,
distancing.
right, right, and
you didn't know it then. And I was like, yeah.
And so you saw some real spikes in, or a rise in the number of search and rescues that some of these sheriff's offices that historically had low numbers were starting to really feel the heat from search and rescue. And so, we're talking about resource poor communities where we've got 66% of the population lives west of the Cascades, but about 66% of the land mass is east of the Cascades. And so
those 66%, that population comes east to go visit us.
Right. And so we've got to find a solution. And, we needed to find a solution 10 years ago.
Right.
And so every year it's getting worse. I talk about, these huge projects that are happening in communities. I mean, Hood River is just an example of these tourist-based things that are happening. And so we've got to find a way that's not on the local taxpayer
Right.
to fund this. We need to find a way where the tourists are chipping in. So I think that
They're using resources. They should help support it, right?
you bet. And I think that's a real viable option. I mean, the kind of discussion is like a one-stop shop for state licensing. You can get your boat registration, you can get your hunting license, you can get your OHV card, whatever, all at one website. And, $5 or $10, there's a fee that goes to support Oregon Search and Rescue. And the infrastructure is already set up through the legislature, through that bill, to distribute the funds. There's a way to do it. The legislature gave the Sheriff's Association the ability to manage that fund. We report to OEM. We're really just the stewards of it. It's not ours. It's, a state fund. And so that exists. It's just, how do we fund it?
The mechanism.
Yeah.
I might have this session's almost done. Short session, that could be a good one to work on in the interim. So,
well, if I had my headphones off, you'd see my ears perking up. So.
There we go. I'm going to read this to make sure I get it right. You were named Sheriff of the Year for 2024-25 by the Western States Sheriff Association for your advocacy on public safety and public lands. What does that recognition mean to you, Matt? And then how has that shaped your approach in leading in Hood River?
Yeah, of course, it's always nice to be recognized. It was a humbling experience. I didn't expect it at all. And
purple shirt and cowboy hat.
Yeah,
I called you out like, where'd that come from?
Yep. Yeah, so Western States Sheriff's Association is something that I've been involved in for about a decade. And so we represent 18 Western states with similar issues, and, including search and rescue and the public lands impacts. And so, because Hood River County is 68% public lands, we're almost 75% publicly owned. 68% is federal. It creates some unique challenges. It creates challenges with funding, because we've got 75% of our land that can't be developed, that we don't collect taxes on. And so that's challenging. And then all of the visitation that brings, challenging the federal government, not maybe being able to be counted on to help us sometimes. That's really what we do with WSSA, is we advocate a lot at the federal level. And so we're working with our federal, our congressional reps there in multiple states. We've made some inroads this year in some of the areas. We've got some specific things that we're really working on and really concerned about. One of them being a federal OSHA rule that will essentially decimate search and rescue in the Western U.S. It's called the Emergency Response Standard. So it's those types of things, because I'm always focusing on, if I'm going to get involved in something, how does it help our community?
Right.
And because of Hood River's makeup, because of the land ownership, because of the way of life there, the reliance on tourism, I want to continue to support that economy, but we've got to have the resources to do it.
Right. So you mentioned it, the second largest city in Hood River County, Cascade Locks, and they contract with you for extra law enforcement services, even though they're part of the county, but they want a dedicated, as much as possible, a patrol deputy there. How do you keep the political agenda when you have a city council that's contracting and thinking there's specific services you should be able to provide, or you should be doing those things, says we're giving you the money to work? How do you keep the politics out of that and just keep the community safe? What's been your approach to doing that?
I will say that I truly and deeply value that contract. Even though it's not a large part of our budget, I think it's the ability to provide direct services to that community means a lot to me. And so that relationship means a lot to me. And I've worked with several mayors, several city administrators, the
City council over there.
Yep, changes a lot.
Right.
They've got a lot of new council people this year, and a new mayor this year, a newer city administrator. And there's always going to be challenges. It doesn't necessarily get super political. I mean, there is certainly political components to it. But we just really concentrate on trying to meet the needs of that community. And it's unique, as you know. I mean, you were part of that community for quite a while.
Almost a decade.
Yeah, that proximity to I-84, and then with the interstate bridge there, it's challenging,
Right.
because
And there's people don't realize that that's just a drug courier route. Either
Yep.
across the bridge or just up and down the freeway. There's the stops.
absolutely.
And robberies happen there.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
not it's a small sleepy community till it's not.
Right. Yeah, and they get plenty of visitation. There's plenty of things that happen there, but it's because of that easy on, easy off to the interstate or hopping across to a different state. There's definitely some challenges there, and there's some exposure there for the community. And so, I'm really proud of the work that we do there, and hope to continue that contract in perpetuity. And I know that the city would like to expand services. It's tough funding wise. And I know that they're continuing to look at that and how can they get more law enforcement presence, and we'd love to be able to do that.
Yeah. Before I was on council, while I was on council, there's always these economic opportunities to do something with some of that port property, whether it was the casino, Nestle's, and I got beat up over Nestle's, the water, whatever. But it seems like these outside influences will tell a small community, you don't know what you're doing. We're smarter than you. And these communities are, they took logging away from them. They used to have 2 mills there, and you had another one across the river, and those were family wage jobs, good paying jobs, and that supported families. And now you're just kind of left with, well, you can just use tourism. That doesn't pay the bills all the time, and it impacts the services, the roads, the water, the sewer, all those things. And I like the local decision and keeping that. And the politics behind that's another story. The Nestle Waters or even the casino thing, but. We gotta let those small communities grow and do things, and because they're limited in what they can do in that national scenic area.
Oh yeah, 100%. It does warm my heart though to see how that community has come along. They've done some great things down there. There's a lot of housing that they've put in, and there's a lot of people lived up
there.
Yep.
That first, I was one of the first ones to move in up there.
Yep.
It was windy and cold up on that hill.
Yep. But, it's one of the things that many of our communities in the state lack is affordable housing. And, there's more attainable housing there, and they're building more, which is fantastic. You look at that downtown corridor, they have done amazing things with it. There's some great businesses.
The port's got about 30 acres. I've been trying to get some nonprofits to work with them to look at some affordable housing there. It looks promising, but that's their politics to worry about. I'm just making the introductions to see what works on. But yeah, there's some good land to have there and good affordable. And it's a beautiful area. Summertime's just gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. It's amazing.
I mean, I remember waking up, looking out the back window and seeing the river, seeing the other side over there. It's like, man, it's just a pretty place to live. Wintertime, when it's blowing, you got a gale force winds coming. It's like, oof, okay. Hey, I want to talk about the Martin family cold case that's kind of started in 1958, and it's kind of been haunting things. What's the latest on the investigation, and what are you doing to help bring closure to the family with that? Because people don't really realize that, and I didn't know it until I saw the news stuff. Like, oh wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case, and one of those things that you never expect that you're going to deal with. Something that is now 66 years old, and so it was really interesting. There's not a lot of family left, so it would be like grandchildren. There's I think maybe 2 grandchildren still alive, and maybe some far-reaching family members, but essentially, we had a local diver that had done a ton of work and research and was very, very scientific about his explorations. And
he had a methodology. And
it's fascinating. He did some briefs for us before, we kind of gave him the nod. But he did everything right. He got it all permitted through the Corps. He did NEPA studies. I mean, he had a lot of hoops to jump through to be able to dive that locks and the old Cascade locks that was built in the 1800s. And so He finds what he believes is a car, and so we do a recovery effort in March, and we're able to remove part of the car. And really, at this point, we believe it's a vehicle from everything that we've been able to match up. Be honest, I think he's probably going to continue and see if he can find any other evidence, but it's been so long. I don't know how many more answers we're going to get. I think it was big. Our investigators were really pleased with the fact that we were able to find the car, because that was a mystery in and of itself. I mean, they were searching all the way up, right below the Dalles Dam.
Yeah.
And there was a, group of people that believed that the car went in there from evidence back in the 50s. And but I think, it's my predecessor many years ago, Sheriff Gilmeth, who served from 1947 and 1972, was the sheriff at the time, and he believed that it had driven into the locks, and probably a tragic accident, and that's kind of what it's pointing towards right now. So that's where we're at with it.
Yeah. So kind of changing gears, beyond Hood River and what happened in Portland in 2020, how politics can complicate law enforcement, and what challenges did that create? We talked about it a little bit earlier, but that, and then how do we just kind of get law enforcement back to the basics, protecting the community, being there, listening, and doing the right things for the right reasons? Let's kind of wrap that up with that.
Yeah. It's, I'll go back to, kind of my point before. It's getting people, the basics are sitting down and talking, having a conversation, and hearing each other out, and finding good solutions, because again, at the end of the day, this shouldn't be political. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. Public safety should be at the top of everybody's, priority list. And so, for my commitment, is to continue with those relationships. And I think all Oregon sheriffs and Oregon law enforcement as a whole, is interested in that. And we have built really meaningful relationships, with legislators on both sides of the aisle, like I mentioned before. And I think that's what needs to continue. And it's resisting what's happening in other parts of the country,
Right.
And really taking a look at what do we have in Oregon. We're really ahead of the game in a lot of areas. And that from the way that our officers are trained from the outset, the change in the way that we're providing that training, the amount of training that they're getting, the ongoing training, it's incredible. But then
it's okay to be progressive sometimes when you hear those things, because it is. I was at DPSST the other day for the memorial, but I go out there quite a bit because that's my roots. Even though I went to, it was Western Oregon State, Western down in Monmouth. Yeah, it's where the original police academy was.
That's where I went as well.
Yeah, it's like that's been a hot minute. It's you see the new facility, like, whoa, this is nice.
Yep.
No, okay, yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's true. It's the training is incredible right now. You get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's on the front end, and then on the back end is the accountability. The accountability that Oregon expects from their law enforcement profession that doesn't exist nationally. So, you mentioned in my bio, I'm the current chair of the Board on Public Safety Standards and Training, and my tenure there ends on June 30th, but it has been really fulfilling. I've served on the Corrections Policy Committee. I chair that right now. I have my last meeting next week, and then on the Public Safety Memorial Fund board there. But you see the unfortunate decisions that some of our law enforcement professionals make in their careers. Moral fitness violations, ethics violations. But what Oregon has is a system of accountability, and there's an expectation. And so, having done this for a long time, I've been part of these committees and the board for 9 years. It doesn't exist in other states. If you remember, before the George Floyd incident in Minnesota was actually looking at Oregon as a model because of the system that we have set up here. And so I think when to kind of circle back to your question where, we're looking at new laws, we're looking at, we've got to change something. This happened in Ohio, this happened in Florida, whatever. You need to look at what you have already, because
Are you in search of a solution looking for a problem, or do we have a problem you have to find a solution for? And that's what I see sometimes in Salem.
and there's a lot of emotions, behind these issues. And I understand because they are emotional issues and they're tragic and there's things that have happened, but there's bad apples and there's bad situations in every single profession. And there's, equity issues in every single profession. And so we just really need to take a step back sometimes and say, okay, what do we already have? What do we have in place here in Oregon? Because we are progressive in a lot of ways and we're ahead of the game.
Yeah, you said it, and I would tell my friends that joined the career field, especially a really good friend of mine. I said, hey, when we walk into lunch in here, I'm going to sit down and have lunch. Watch what happens when I walk in uniform. He was with the ride along, and he sat there and watched, and everybody, all eyes are on you. When you wear that uniform, all eyes are on you. And if you get a DUI as, you're picking up garbage every day working for the refuse company, people don't care. It's like back page news. Police officer does it. It's on the front page, and it's accountability. And I think when I was in charge of our recruiting in Portland, when we'd go out of state recruiting people, trying to find people, you would hear, oh, he's a great officer. But then you kind of looked at some reports that they wrote. It's like, no, he did this, and it was kind of questionable here. And they kind of scratch the surface a little bit more. And the reason why they're saying he's great, because they can shove their problem off onto somebody else. And where we now with DPSST and the certificates and fitness for duty and all those safeguards that are in place, we make sure the bad apples get out of the career field and can't come back in. And that's a big thing.
And on the front end, before they even walk in the door, we have such a robust background process now.
Yep.
And we just revamped that about a year and a half ago to make it even more, kind of more of a fail-safe. And so, we've got some great things going to make sure that we get the right people in the door, and the people that shouldn't be there can see the back door and exit. So.
All right, Matt, I want to say thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and talk shop. I mean, our paths have crossed so many different times, and I really appreciate your friendship and the stuff we've done. All right, back to Basics Army. You got to hear from Sheriff English from Hood River County. He is one of our top-notch sheriffs in the state. I'm sure some of the other sheriffs will get a little irritated with me when I say that, but I know Matt. I work with him a lot. And so with that, he's got ideas on how we can get law enforcement back on track if we get too political, and I appreciate that. But back to Basics Army. Stay tuned for the next episode.